Okay, so what I'm learning from sci-fi design is that I have to study mainly from sources that aren't pieces of artwork necessarily, or aren't very stylized pieces of artwork, in the sense that the sources that I do study from have to be kind of more accurate, like functionally. So say I had two options, right? One was to study a painting of a robot, and it looked relatively believable, you know. You could tell some parts of it weren't 100% functional, but most of it looked like it looked like a robot, right? It looked like a functioning, roughly robot. And then the other option was an actual piece of machinery, a photo of an actual piece of machinery that someone, you know, had designed to do a specific purpose, right? Like a dentist. I don't know. I don't really have any decent examples, but you get where I'm coming from. I would study the latter, or I'm learning that I should be studying the latter, because when I study the former, it ends up with me studying an artist's interpretation and what they've learned from studying real world sources, right? And it ends up with me kind of learning a more diluted form of functionality, if that makes sense. Whereas if I would learn from a real world functioning source, then what I would learn would be less diluted, more in line with actual functionality and not an artist's interpretation of it. So today I just did very simple studies using only lines, simply because I find it easier to do lines with my left hand. This is almost definitely a result of me just not having enough practice with my left hand, and lines coming more naturally to almost anyone. Lines were the way we used to draw when we were children, right? So obviously it's going to come before straight shapes, before straight shape painting, I mean. So yeah, I've been doing studies of functionality with lines, and then once I'd learned a bit about once I'd studied that, then I moved on to artistic interpretations, right? Only after I'd learned the initial functionality from real world sources. And this allowed me to take what I had learned from the real world sources and learn how to stylize it, rather than trying to learn both functionality and stylization from the same source. It can get a little bit confusing and you can pick up the wrong things, right? When you're trying to learn about functionality, you can often, get tripped up, basically. I didn't do a massive amount. I'm learning with discipline. What allows me to build discipline more efficiently, I think, is instead of simply dedicating every, moment of thought I have to a specific task like painting, right? Instead of just thinking every free moment I have, right, I need to be painting. Instead, to build discipline, it's more effective to set out a period of time beforehand and then tell yourself that you will spend that time, that time only, doing what you said you would, right? So it becomes kind of this thing that when you do that, even if it ends up being a little bit less volume than, just going ham and going as much as you can, right? It also, finishing those time periods, those predetermined time periods, and actually working for that amount of time and no more, no less, it tells you that you're able to do what you said you would, right? Because if you're just saying, oh, I need to dedicate every moment, whenever I'm not painting, I need to be painting, whenever I'm not drawing, I need to be drawing, that's not really achievable. And so then you don't achieve what you said you would, and then your discipline suffers because of that. And I think that's very important for me to understand, because I employed that method today of setting out the time beforehand, and after completing the work that I said I would, you just feel more disciplined. So yeah, that's definitely a method that I'm going to be taking forward. Also, just in general, left-handed drawing seems to be getting more efficient. Obviously everyday practice will do that, but I think my actual, knowledge is starting to catch up with my skill, my actual draftsmanship skill with my left hand. So that's a plus. Yeah, that's about it. I managed to get into the gym today and do a good leg workout with this cast on my right arm. The best squat variation for me currently is front squatting, which for me is extremely beneficial because when I squat normally, I'm very posterior chain dominant. I use my lower back and my glutes more than I would like to. That's simply because of my levers and how my ankle mobility. And so when I move the weight in front of me for a front squat, I'm able to become much more upright, and the focus is much more on my quads, which I think when I'm doing squats, I'm kind of wanting to happen anyway. And it's much more easy to focus on the quads with the front squat. The downside of that being that, my quads are obviously less strong. So I'm going to only be able to do, as opposed to, 120, I'll only be able to do like 70, right? And it's quite a drastic drop because I'm so posterior chain dominant, right? And then what's good about that as well is I'm able to more fully commit my posterior chain, which is less fatigued after the front squats. I'm able to more fully commit my posterior chain to whatever posterior chain focused exercise I do after that. So today it was good mornings, which I can't really do any of that. I can't really do stiff leg deadlifts or hyperextensions. So good mornings were kind of a lifesaver for me, because they're the only thing I can really get to work my hamstrings properly with this cast on. So yeah, I did a very good morning session, and then after that I did some hip adduction and some leg curls, and then I had to leave because my brother was the one taking me to the gym, and he had to leave as well. So when he left, I had to leave also. But yeah, it was a very good leg session. I'm planning on doing another leg session tomorrow. Whether that's wise, we'll see in the morning. Also, intermittently throughout the day, I've been throwing in Hindu squats, which really focus the quads. They're also really good for knee health and knee strength, which is something that I definitely need to focus on, especially taking into consideration how deep I go with my squats. They're very, they put a lot of pressure on my knees, right? So it's important that I make sure I strengthen them adequately. What else other than that? I'm thinking of maybe adding in, or trying to add in hyperextensions at some point as an alternative for good mornings, but because of how difficult they would be with the cast on, I'm thinking there's not really any point, because good mornings are pretty sufficient for posterior chain activation, especially if you do it with strict form and straight legs. If you really straighten the legs out, you can really get like a good stretch on the hamstrings, and it absolutely destroys your lower back as well, which is always good. I've seen a lot of carryover from the good morning into my deadlift, because when I deadlift, shame to say it, but I do start from a pretty lengthened position when it comes to my legs, quite a bent over lengthened position. I should be starting more upright, and I think one of the reasons I don't is because I'm not focusing on putting my lats in my pockets, really squeezing my lats back when I come up, right? Instead, it's I'm not saying my shoulders are rounded forward or anything, but they're definitely not as tight as they could be. And and when I lift, it's more of a kind of I straighten out my legs first rather than using the power from my legs to get the weight off the floor. I kind of I don't maximize my legs in the deadlift, which is unfortunate. And it's something that very recently, I've tried to fix. Obviously, before I had the cast on, I can't deadlift right now. What else? Yeah, that's about it. The methods I've introduced more discipline into my daily routine have been very beneficial. I've definitely felt the benefits from that. It's going pretty well. More sci-fi study tomorrow, I think. Maybe some actual larger scale tests of what I've learned. And that's about it. Bye.